The bullying ended, but his social life never stopped being miserable. How could he possibly make any friend with such a shameful private life? He had to constantly hide the bruises with long sleeves and had run out of plausible excuses for his streak of black eyes months before. His classmates and professors simply pretended to not know, and he just pretended to believe, being that good of a liar. It was painful, but manageable. He still had his little brother to share that pain with. Carl was all he had, his family, friend and confidant. He was Derek's whole world. But when that age came, he started having crushes toward girls in his school, and those feelings weren't as easily suppressed. Once again, he felt utterly helpless. He could not tell anyone about his problems, could not allow people to get close to him, otherwise he would have to think of an explanation for not being allowed to bring any friend home, let alone a girl he liked. Derek was tormented by cruel thoughts, often demanding the heavens why what others took for granted was but an impossible dream for him. Fueled by the hormonal storms, Derek's rage started growing relentlessly. He started having trouble sleeping at night, thinking about all those lovey-dovey couples out there. Derek knew he was different from them. His crippling flaw wasn't being shy or having a bad case of acne. His problem couldn't be cured by any doctor, because it had a name and surname. Ezio Esposito, his trash bag of a father. Derek started conceiving plan after plan to get rid of him, even if that meant killing him. At night he would devise elaborate and meticulous plans that often involved prolonged torture, making Ezio suffer like Derek did for all those years. But when morning came, he would always realize it was a dumb plan. More wishful thinking than anything else. Derek lacked the means and the ruthlessness necessary for getting rid of Ezio. No matter how much he hated him, Ezio was still his father and he was just an angry teenager. Kill Ezio, sure, and what about then? Live a whole life ridden with guilt. Running away from home to avoid being arrested. And with what money? Killing Ezio would have meant abandoning Carl forever, and destroying any possible chance of being happy in the future. So, every morning Derek would swallow his plan along with the porridge and move on. His only real prospect was to cram as a madman, get a scholarship and get out of that hell as fast as possible. Time flew, and in the blink of an eye as was the last summer before Derek's first year of high school. Despite the hot climate, his heart was cold as ice. Derek had already hit his growth spurt. That combined with his martial arts and muscle training had given him a mean look. Ezio was aware of that, and being a coward had started to avoid beating Derek as much as possible, making Carl the new favorite target. Derek had already tried standing up for his brother, but the only result had been Ezio buying a nightstick from the local army surplus and getting beaten with it instead, that with Ezio's bare hands. He saved Carl from that by begging and crying, and only because the ruckus had alarmed their neighbors. So, whenever Ezio threw one of his tantrums, Derek could only watch his brother getting beaten, again and again. Then, one morning Ezio received his first big commission in years. So, he wore his best suit despite the heat and had Derek preparing him the briefcase and the laptop. Ezio was in a real hurry, he could not afford his competitors to snatch this whale. It could have been his career-making commission. Derek rushed to the door, where Ezio was already waiting, and helped him adjust the laptop's satchel. Ezio ran to the elevator, pushing the button like a madman, but the light remained red. Cursing his damn condo, the building manager and his rotten luck, Ezio made a rush to the stairs. And that's when Derek noticed it. Turning his head to follow his father, Derek noticed that the light made odd reflections on the hallway's floor. Ezio had just passed in front of him when he realized that the janitor had just washed the stairs but forgot to put the wet floor sign. It happened all in an instant. Ezio made a long heavy stride, all his weight down and forward, and then his foot slipped. Derek could have warned him, could have even extended an arm and prevented the fall. But instead he chose to remain still. Ezio tumbled down the stairs, bounced on the next alley and tumbled again, crashing downstairs. His body was a broken mess, all his limbs bent in unnatural angles. As any teenager, Derek had his smartphone at hand, so he started to make several photos to prove that the floor was wet and there was no warning sign. His mind was already planning on hiring the best shark lawyer he could and sue the building managing firm responsible for his condo. Only then he carefully walked down the stairs to confirm Ezio's death. He was there, incapable of making a moan or asking for help, but his eyes were fixated on Derek, begging for help. Derek grinned to him and said, "Do you really think I am so stupid to never learn anything from you? As you more than once taught me, never delegate. If you want something done right, do it yourself. Your smartphone is in your pocket, take it out and call 911. I'm just a failure of a son, I do not want to mess this up for you, Daddy." Ezio's eyes were full of shock and hate, but that lasted only a moment. His head went limp, his gaze blank. A laughter fought to come out, but Derek suppressed it. Instead he started shouting for help, putting on his best terrorized son impression. As always, Derek's mother was too obsessed with her problems, her grief, her feelings to bother looking for the lawyer, leaving everything in Derek's hand, since Ezio was no more. 3 birds with 1 stone. After a careful research he contacted and hired the best shark lawyer they could afford, so that Derek would be his client instead of his mother. He told him everything about his father's incident, the abuse, and the need to make so that the money would be split between the 3 of them, mother and sons. Both Derek and Carl were very firm on that point. They wanted the lawyer to start the process to get emancipation. With the money from the compensation and the inheritance, they had enough to be self-sufficient until Derek could provide for them both. What followed was the happiest period in their life. First, they obtained the inheritance, and shortly after they got emancipated and moved away from their mother's place. Not even a month later, they received a very generous settling offer from the building manager. They used it to settle up and make proper plans for the future. During the following years, bullies were not a problem. Derek and Carl were now both martial artists and had each other's back. Finally they could experience having friends and girlfriends, their domestic nightmare finally over. They suffered many disappointments though, since too many of those so-called friends turned out to be people that wanted to use their parent-free house as a party house. Also they had a hard time figuring what being a normal teen was supposed to be. While their peers seemed only interested in having fun and skipping classes, they were focused on studying and saving as much as possible. Derek and Carl would spend holidays and vacations doing part-time jobs to slow down the thinning of their bank account. They were not poor, but not rich either. They knew they had to save as much as possible, in case rainy days would once more fall upon them. But all in all they had a good life. Derek got a scholarship and obtained a bachelor degree in chemistry, soon followed by a master in biochemistry. Carl was doing well too, already got his engineering degree, ready to study for his master and already had a fiancée. Despite being really happy for his little brother, that was really a painful thorn in Derek's side. He had always been the more socially inept between the two, and never managed to get into a stable relationship, not even in college. Derek had no problem talking to girls, the problem always lied in him being picky and ended in his inability to trust. He had had many crushes, but never fell in love. At the beginning he put the blame on his bad luck, always finding shallow or idiotic girls. After finding more than one good girl, he put the blame on his dark past. But when confronted with Carl's happy relationship he could only blame himself. While Carl had suffered almost the same things, he got out much stronger and purer than Derek. Derek was just too scared of being hurt again to let any relationship grow above a certain level, and that was an enemy that he could not just beat up. Derek accepted the first decent paid job he got, working in the night shift of a big chemical company in the Q&A department. Carl had shared with him, as a graduation present, that he was willing to propose to his fiancée as soon as he got his master. Hence Derek needed money because he had only 2 years to save enough to give his little brother a decent wedding. Derek did not like his current job, but it was a way to start his working career and filling his curriculum. Also it was well paid, and he resolved to use the company insurance to seek for psychological counseling. He knew he had problems and wanted to work them out. Derek consulted several doctors before finding someone he was able to work with, and after several months he felt he was finally starting to make some progress. But alas, such happiness was not bound to last. It was a Friday evening, and Derek was getting prepared for work. He was still stuck doing Q&A because the pay was too good, and no matter how many times Carl said he wanted a small ceremony, Derek was sure that whatever they planned to spend, it would at least double in the end. It was a goddamn wedding, hence things were supposed to blow off proportions at some point. That's just how they work. Derek was adjusting his shirt when the smartphone rang on the notes of "Night on Bald Mountain," the preset ringtone for unknown numbers. Derek Esposito, who is it? Mr. Esposito, this is the St. Joseph Hospital. The female voice sounded worried. This together with the word, hospital, sent him a shiver down his spine. Is Carl Esposito your brother? Derek could almost hear her biting her nails. Yes, what happened? He was involved in a car accident and is in serious conditions. You should come here as soon as possible. The doctors need you since you are his healthcare proxy and the patient is unconscious. A car accident, Derek yelled while rushing out of the door and looking for a cab. We don't have any fucking car. What the hell happened? I'm sorry, I am not at liberty to say. The doctors will explain it. Derek hung up on her. He had no time for useless babbling, only for a goddamn cab. Every second in the traffic was torture, and when he finally arrived it was too late. The surgeon and a police officer explained to him that Carl had been run over by a drunk driver. The culprit had run off and the police was still looking for him. A bystander had immediately called 911, but because of the traffic jam caused by the accident it took hours for the ambulance to arrive. So, when Carl arrived at the hospital he was already in critical conditions. He had multiple fractures, ruptured spleen and internal bleeding, requiring immediate surgery. Derek had been called while Carl was just entering the OR. They had done their best to save him, but Carl had lost too much blood, so there was nothing they could do. They offered Derek their condolences, but all he could hear was white noise. Let me see my brother, he begged. The body was covered by a sheet, only the head visible. Derek could still see traces of blood on the face of his little brother. Derek left his number to the police officer to be kept updated about the investigations and then returned home. The culprit was quickly apprehended thanks to the traffic cameras. It turned out to be a kid, barely 17 years old, that had stolen his old man's car and then got drunk and high with his friends. Derek lived the months before the trial in anguish. The damned DA had decided to prosecute him as a minor, and the even more damned judge had granted him house arrests. All while his little brother, his Carl, was dead because of him. How could they do such a thing? Derek would yell and argue with anyone willing to listen to him. Why all this talking about the rights and the future of that little sh*t? What about my brother's rights? What about his future? Carl has none because of him. What kind of justice is that? Derek visited multiple times the DA office, expressing his outrage and demanding them to ask for the maximum sentence. They were always kind and accommodating, and promised him that they would not forget about Carl. When the day of the trial finally came, Derek's world died one more time. The DA and the defense attorney had come to a settlement. Since Chris Wainwright, this was the name of the murderer, was still a minor and that was also his first offense, he had accepted to go in rehab and do 600 hours of community service. If Chris would complete his rehab program and did not commit crimes in the next 3 years, then he would be a free citizen with no criminal record. Derek was too dumbfounded to even be angry. When the session was over, he just walked to the DA and asked a single question with muffled voice. Why? And then with their most kind and accommodating tone, the DA assistants explained to Derek that Chris was just a kid from a good family that had made a dumb mistake. He had a brilliant future ahead. Chris had already been admitted at the Caltech and this was his first offense. Also, his parents had hired a great lawyer and the judge would likely be unwilling to destroy Chris' life. Despite their expectations, Derek did not make a scene. Derek's fire was extinguished, he had no more tears to shed. In the following days, Derek lived by going through the motions. He kept following his routine like nothing had happened, his brain still refusing everything that happened in the last half year. The only thing that made him feel alive was that constant headache that had started shortly after Carl's death. According to his doctor, it was a stress-related symptom, so with all that had happened, Derek had just been swallowing aspirins and paracetamol like they were candies. But the pain never did go away, instead it was getting worse. Derek finally found the strength to get a serious checkup, and once again bad news were waiting for him. According to the full-body scan and the follow-up biopsy, he had stage 2 pulmonary cancer. But I never smoked in my whole life. Derek exclaimed, more amused than scared. Indeed, it's odd. Dr. Monroe, his oncologist, was quite puzzled. She was a good-looking Hispanic woman, maybe 5 years older than Derek. In another moment he would have probably asked her out. You told me you work for a chemical company, right? Derek nodded. Such an aggressive cancer is too uncommon to be a coincidence. My personal opinion is that their ventilation system failed. You and God knows how many more people have been breathing poison from quite some time. But we wear masks the whole time we work with the chemicals, and speaking for myself, I follow the safety protocols to the letter. My colleagues always mock me for it. Derek was still in disbelief. Then maybe the masks are cheap pieces of junk. Or maybe the lab or the storage, if not both, have leaks. These corporate scumbags only seek profits. It would not surprise me in the least if they cut from the safety budget to put more dividends in their pockets. Dr. Monroe was too outraged. Even in his catatonic state, Derek could tell there was more to it. Doctor, what are you hiding from me? He asked, looking her straight in the eyes for the first time. She nibbled on her lower lip for a while before answering. Between you and me, you are not the first case from your company. I have already reported it to the Department of Health and to the federals. If I were in your shoes, I would get a good lawyer and sue the soul out of them. You'll need a lot of money for the treatments. I agree on the lawyer, but I refuse any treatment. I'll just take palliative care. Dr. Monroe jumped from her chair. Do you realize that without the proper treatments you have 6 months, a year at best to live? Also, as I have already said, your cancer is really aggressive. We need to start as soon as possible if we want a chance to beat it. The situation was dramatic, but Derek found all those words hilarious, so he could not refrain from chuckling. We barely know each other, doctor. So, we have nothing to do if not going separate ways. Derek said to her with an icy tone. What do I have to live for? I have no family, no loved ones. My little brother's ashes are all that is left to keep me company. I could die tomorrow and I would not give **T. They parted on bad terms, but she still gave him her number, in case he changed his mind or simply needed to talk. Derek called his old shark lawyer and explained everything. Years had passed but they would still send each other Christmas cards. Derek had kept tabs on him, just in case. He had now more gray hair than before but was still a first-class shark. Derek stopped going to work and started spending his money without much care. He would go to all the fancy restaurants he had always wanted to try, bought the suits he always dreamed about and only ate his favorite foods for breakfast, lunch and dinner. Derek would spend most of his days playing games on his brand new gaming PC and revisiting all the spots that held a significance for him and Carl. Then, 24 days after the diagnosis, he had an epiphany.